In a world that can be challenging, and at times unpredictable, it's hard to find moments to focus on what you need. Join Stephanie James on The Spark as she guides you to use your inner flame to ignite your best life. As a best-selling author, psychotherapist, transformational life coach, and international show host, Stephanie is dedicated to helping you create a life that takes you, your goals, and your passions to the next level, so you can live a life that is fully lit up and fully alive. She believes that your life is meant to be a beautiful expression of the things that light you up. That by living your dreams, you give permission to others to do the same. Are you ready to feel alive and inspired to fuel your dreams and put a fire behind your desires? Let's ignite a spark in one another that will illuminate the world. The Spark, with your host Stephanie James, starts now.
I want to make sure that I introduce you here. I'm with Stephan A Schwartz, who's an internationally known researcher in the field of extraordinary human functioning. I mean, I could go on and on about your accolades, Stephan. Truly, I think the work that you've done in the field of human consciousness is absolutely extraordinary. Stephan does a daily report, the Schwartz Report, and he's been the editor of Subtle Energy, a founder and past president of the Society for Anthropology of Consciousness. He's who's who in America and who's who in the world. And I'm just so pleased to have you with us on The Spark. Thank you, Stephan, for being here.
Oh, always a pleasure, Stephanie. What's up? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm really wanting to just talk about, lots of things. Just part of what I think people need to hear is, you've got so much information about what's really happening in the world, number one, with all these viruses and everything else that's going on in our political system. And we don't need to necessarily focus on that, but also where you see consciousness going and really what is our hope here?
Yes, no, I get it. I agree with you. I just saw a thing. There were 400 shooting incidents over the 4th of July and 150 people were shot. I mean, we are in trouble. We are in a cold civil war.
Yeah.
That is as dangerous as the War of 1861. It's a cold civil war at this point. You have one party that is quite explicitly and unashamedly trying to turn us into a pseudo-democracy rather than a democracy. I mean, they don't even disagree with you about that. And we have been stressed by the COVID pandemic in a number of ways, which have made it clear, for instance, that our healthcare system doesn't work properly. And, you can either take a very bleak view and sometimes that's where it leaves me. But I also think it's an opportunity to completely restructure ourselves. And it's going to depend on how many people really are committed to doing that. We have, you can see it as a crisis, or you can see it as an opportunity to restructure the country so that the main priority is the fostering of well-being. And if we make that choice, then we're going to get through climate change okay. And many of these issues, I mean, the racism that has suddenly come up in a way that I thought, when they signed the Voting Rights Act in '64, I thought, well, okay, we're through with that. But no, we're not at all. I don't know. I think what's happened is we have gotten to a point where every citizen has to act. And the question is, are they prepared to do that? And are they prepared to foster well-being? Or is there some other priority? Because we have about a third of the country who essentially are terrified that they're losing their status as we become a majority minority country. And so we have this white supremacy crisis that is occurring all over the place in the weirdest of ways. So I just think we're at a crossroads, and it's not clear how it's going to come out.
Well, this is some conversation you and I have had before, and I think more than ever, just vitally important that we're really looking at how we can contribute, how we can not just lay down and play victim here to our circumstances. When you talk about the importance of making choices for well-being, and that's each individual's responsibility, help flesh that out a little bit, flesh that out a little bit so we know, what does that look like?
Okay. All right. I can flesh that out for you very specifically. All right. You woke up this morning. You made a decision that you won't do anything that requires plastic because we have a huge plastic problem. So you stop using plastic wherever possible. You take time to look at the things that you use and buy in your house, your family's daily life, and you only buy things made by companies which you know to explicitly make fostering well-being a priority. And there are such companies, and you can find them. You look at, for instance, a company like Costco that increasingly carries more and more organic material. You buy things locally where possible. You go to the farmer's market and you buy local stuff where you can. You, if you have a little extra money and you're going to support something, you want to support something that is going to foster equality and racial harmony, and that supports the health of the matrix, the Earth's matrix of consciousness. So maybe you're supporting an animal agency that's helping protect elephants, for example. You eliminate all of the things in your house which contain toxins and poisons, and you replace them with organic things, because the toxic load of most Americans in their bodies is preposterous and results in all kinds of illnesses. So all those things that you squirt in the air that make things smell good, you get rid of all that. You get rid of soaps that have got a lot of chemicals in them. You try to detoxify your life, because that will have a very big impact on your life and on the life of your kids and your partner. You, in your garden, if you have one, you plant plants which the bees like and that birds like. You do a Google and search on plants bees like, and those are the kind of plants and flowers you put in your garden, because the bees are in great crisis, and the bee, although we don't really think about them very much in this way, most of the foods that we eat are dependent on bee pollination, and the bees are in crisis, as are butterflies. So you plant plants in your garden which make you an island of safety and security for butterflies and bees and birds and hummingbirds, all that. Basically, what you do is every time you get to make a choice, and you do it hundreds of times every day, that you only choose the option that fosters well-being, or that fosters well-being the best. And you think all of these little things hardly make any difference. But in fact, of course, when we know from research, when 10% of any cohort will make these kind of changes, that the entire cohort, whether it's a church group, a school group, or a nation, has to accommodate for that. And you can see this playing itself out both in the positive in things like Black Lives Matter, but you also see it playing itself out in things like the Proud Boys or the 3%ers. So it's a choice. I mean, in a very real sense, you know, when Benjamin Franklin was coming down the stairs after the Constitutional Convention in 1787, a woman stopped him and said to him, "Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have we got?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." And I think that that statement in the 1780s is as true in the 2021s as it was then, maybe more so. So what needs to happen is that this all needs to stop being theoretical, and we need to see it play out in your life, my life, by the choices that we make. Every choice is a vote. Are you voting for well-being, or are you voting for greed and stupidity?
So it does take a level of true consciousness and attunement to our lives. And so, you know, I'm hearing too, this isn't going to happen overnight. And we can start that absolute checklist, if you will, of checking off, whether it's the household products or the food that we eat, you know, how we're showing up in community, what we're giving money to. And then I'm really hearing that it's an accumulation of all of those components that then start making that change. And then we're really seeing that not only within our own lives, but we can see the ripple effect of that.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, you think, well, I'm just an ordinary person. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have any official position. You know, I don't command any army. I mean, who pays any attention to me? And the answer is, think about how Gandhi got independence for India without a war. I mean, think about that. You know, just before he was assassinated, a reporter from the Times of India went up to Gandhi's ashram and said to him, you know, my editor sent me up and he only has one question I'm supposed to ask you. And Gandhi said, well, what's the question? And the reporter said, my editor wants to know how you forced the British to leave India. How did you get one of the most powerful nations on earth to give up their most prized colonial possession? How did you do that? How did you force them to do that? And Gandhi's response speaks directly to the question you're raising, Stephanie, and that is, he said, it's not what we did that mattered, although that mattered. It wasn't what we said that mattered, although that mattered. It was the nature of our character, who we are, our beingness, the choices we made that led the British to choose to leave India. Notice the difference in the verb force to leave India, choose to leave India. We can do this in this cold civil war that we are in right now. We can do it when individuals always choose the option that fosters well-being. I mean, it seems so small, such a little thing to be able to do. And everyone can do it no matter who you are, whether it's what kind of toilet paper you buy or what kind of you have a lot of money, what kind of investments, what are you investing in? Are you investing in things which support remediation of climate change? Are you investing in non-petroleum energy sources? That kind of thing. So whether you're at a big scale or a little bitty scale, the choices that you make every day, not just your choices, but the collective choices when everyone is doing this. So you do it, you tell people that you are actually making this conscious effort, and you invite them to join you, and you just do the math. If you start with 10 people and each of them ask 10 of their friends, and then each of those ask 10 of their friends, you know, you're up into millions of people very quickly.
Yeah, it's so brilliant, and it is so simplistic. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel or do something extravagant. It truly is those day-to-day choices.
Yes. And we know that it works. This isn't theoretical. That's the point. There's nothing, this is not some philosophical speculation I'm pushing. Look at it this way. When you were a girl, women's position in the general society was very different than it is today. Yeah. Did somebody pass laws? Did the president go out and tell everybody, okay, we're going to treat women differently? No. Women demanded that they be treated differently, that they be treated with more equality, and they voted and chose people who supported that. And they did in their personal lives, their friendships, their business relationships, they did things which supported that. And lo and behold, it changed. You have to keep working at it. It's like the racism, you know, we thought we were through racism in 64, but now here we are in 2021, and we're back at it again, because there's about a third of the country who are white supremacists. And so how do you deal with white supremacists? Well, you can get into violence, or you just make different choices about everything you do, and their minority status closes down the door for them, because they are not a majority. And when a majority of the population feels strongly about something, that's what happens.
That's so hopeful, Stephan. I mean, it truly, and some people don't like the word hope, but I think we need it right now. I think, yeah, I think we can look, you know, at the news and, you know, as you shared, I mean, we can flip it on at any time and there's some horror that's out there. And I think it can really flip people into a place of hopelessness and helplessness.
Yes.
And so I'm hearing, I mean, this is one of the biggest keys for transformation.
Yes, I mean, we know this works because it has worked. That's how Gandhi got independence for India. That's how Martin Luther King got a conservative Southern president to sign the Voting Rights Act. That's how we dealt with, we went from gay to LGBTQ. We now have people, you know, who are expressing themselves in ways they would never have attempted a few years ago. So can we do this? Absolutely. Are we going to do it? That is up to you and me.
Well, those are great words to take a break with. We need to take a quick break here, and I can't wait to come back and continue the conversation with scientist and researcher Stephan A Schwartz. More in a moment. So we're back. I'm here with Stephan A Schwartz, and we've been talking about what you can do to make positive change in our world, that we no longer have to be victims. And it's really a matter of making choices in everything that we do. When we make the choice for well-being, we can really start being, I think it was Gandhi that said, be the change we want to see in the world.
Yes. And when you get, we know how many people it takes. They did research at Van Rensselaer Polytech and published a series of papers which show that when 10% of any cohort, whether it's a little group, a neighborhood committee, or it's a whole nation, when 10% change their consciousness about something, then the whole cohort has to accommodate for that, good or bad. And so those of us who support well-being, when we have at least 10% of the population who are actively pursuing and acting on fostering well-being, then the whole country's got to accommodate to that. So
I love that.
We are more powerful than we know.
Yeah, that's giving me the chills, Stephan. And you were giving, great examples where we've seen that with LGBTQ and with, the women's movement and Martin Luther King. How have you experienced that in your own life?
Oh dear heavens. Well, 4 times in my life, what got me interested in this, Stephanie, it's about 25 years ago now. 4 times in my life, I've been involved with changing history. Now, some of the times I was just a little spear carrier, as it were. The civil rights movement when I was a teenager, I was just one of the people that got arrested. And sometimes, as in the transformation of the military from an elitist conscription organization to a all-volunteer meritocracy, I played a much bigger role. So I've seen it at different levels, and I've seen it in small things and large things. I mean, when I think of them, I think of the civil rights movement in the 50s, early 60s. In the 70s, the transformation of the military. Concurrent with that, the developing consciousness movement and its first cousin, the ecology movement. And then most recently, dealing with climate change, doing the Schwartz report every day and books and papers that I've written. And about 25 years ago, I started looking at, well, how does this work? Because usually when you read things about creating social change, it's how much money can you raise and how much media attention can you get, those kind of things. And I thought, but that when I looked at the actual data, as you know, I am a data person. All I want to know about is objectively verifiable data, not speculations or theories or philosophies. So when I began to look at the data, I discovered over and over again that this business about when ordinary people change consciousness about something, that the whole country has to accommodate, for good or ill. I mean, that's how the Nazis came to power in Germany. That's how Mussolini came to power in Italy. But that's also good things. That's how the civil rights movement occurred. That's how the space program occurred. All kinds of things. When you look at them and you get down into the lick log, as we say in Virginia, you discover that it's a little group of people. For instance, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Greenpeace, right? It's one of the largest environmental movements in the world. Been around for quite a while. Well, how many people know that it was begun by 2 Quaker couples who were expats living in British Columbia, and some media people several of whom were also expats during the Vietnam War period, and who began to work first as a peace movement, and then they realized there was a connection with that and the environmental movement, so it was a green peace. That's where the word comes from. And I happen to know one of the people, Rex Weiler, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, and I interviewed him. I wrote a chapter about him in a book I wrote called The 8 Laws of Change, which is about how all this happens. Well, very few people know the names of these people that founded Greenpeace. And in fact, it's a classic example. If you look at the Quakers, for instance, There are about 87, we are a country of 333 million people. There are about 87,000 Quakers in the United States. There are about 290,000 all over the world. So it's a teeny tiny little group of people. And most people have never met a Quaker. The only thing they know about Quakers is that the cereal box. But if you look at American history, you go back to abolition, penal reform, public education, women's suffrage, the environmental movement, the nuclear freeze movement, all of those movements trace back to a little bitty group of Quakers. And so this tiny little group of people who most people don't know, never met, have no idea what they believe or do. But when you look at the course of American history and you dig down into the details and you get to the hard data, what you discover is that the Quakers have had an effect producing well-being that is utterly disproportionate to the number of people who are Quakers. And they demonstrate again and again how, if you do this, as I was describing, changing at the individual level and getting others to join you in changing at the individual level, you can create massive social transition.
Wow. Yes. You know, that again, it's just like, it's so inspiring because this little group did such huge things in our world that I remember you talking about this before. My mind was blown then, and it's blown again at the remembrance of it now. And what it makes me think of is, those little grassroots groups that we can do in our own communities. That's where it starts.
Exactly. When you look at how social change actually happens, it changes in two different ways. One is violence. Some kind of, group creates violence, and violence leads to more violence. And finally, there's some kind of settlement, but it doesn't last very long. I mean, again, if you look at the data, what you discover is that social change brought about by violence only succeeds 25% of the time. And it doesn't last very long. I mean, if you look at National Socialism in Germany, for instance, it only lasts, about 15 years. If you look at communism in Russia, 1905 to 1991, if you can call the Soviet Union communist at the end there. But anyway, 1905, 1991, it's a single person's lifetime. So two things: violence doesn't succeed very often. It's not a very good way to create change. And if you create change by violence, because you create a them and an us scenario, there's our side and the other side, and because of the violence, even when you succeed, quote unquote, it doesn't last because you've created an opposition force. Whereas if you look at change which is wrought by creating well-being, the United States, I mean, if you go back and you look at what the founders were trying to do, I wrote an article for the Smithsonian Magazine some years ago. I just published it in Schwartz Report. Again, you can do a Google on it too. It's called Dr. Franklin's Plan, because Benjamin Franklin is unique amongst all the founders. First of all, he's the only one who signs all three documents: the Declaration, the treaty that brought peace, and the Constitution. But more than that, what Franklin's idea of the United States was that it was going to be a middle-class country of people from many different backgrounds, and that the key to it was not that you came from a particular background, but that you signed on to the idea of it being a democratic republic. And so Dr. Franklin's plan to create this middle-class, technologically sophisticated, forward-thinking, family-oriented society is just as valid today as it was when they originally came up with it. And it has lasted 240 years. It's the oldest democracy in the world. And so, again, when you can create change and you can do it without violence, when you do it by fostering well-being, in those cases, change will succeed 75% of the time, as opposed to 25 with violence, and it will endure because it is inclusive. And so you don't create an opposition force, and instead you make everyone feel that they have an oar that's on the boat, and therefore it's in their interests to continue and to make it work. And so when we join together, we come together, not as different groups, but as one group who agree and sign on with the idea that we are a democratic republic in which all people are created equal, and we make choices that support that, we're going to prosper, and we're going to get through climate change okay. And to the degree that we don't make those choices, we're going to suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as you're saying those things, every time I talk with you, Stephan, I feel so inspired because it's really a choice. These are choices. We're not stuck. Again, we're not victims of these circumstances. We can look at this as an opportunity of how can we, as in COVID, I always say COVID was one of those interesting teachers that it wasn't us and them, we were all in it.
Yes.
We were all experiencing the same thing for the first time. So that, so humanity banded together in ways that it hadn't before. We had empathy and compassion in ways we hadn't before. And so I think we can, the hope is that we utilize that lesson and use it to truly be aware of what's happening in our world and to make the positive change.
Yes, that's why I say we're at this kind of crossroads. We have learned a lot of things. The pandemic taught us a bunch of things. It taught us that our healthcare system doesn't work properly, that it's not fair. We learned that when everyone prospers, you can think of it as vaccination. When everyone gets vaccinated, you develop herd immunity. When they don't get vaccinated, you don't. And therefore, you continue to have people dying. And what we've come up to now is a sort of threshold of stupidity. Those people who don't get vaccinated, who haven't gotten vaccinated, and you can see it state by state. Again, look at the data. And what you see is where there are high vaccination rates, that the number of deaths and illnesses are dropping like a rock, and where you do not have high vaccination rates, different things are happening. People are dying, people are sick, it's not getting better. And that is really, you can see it as a kind of metaphor for the same thing, where we all choose to support and get behind one idea that supports well-being, fosters well-being, we're going to do okay. And when we don't do that, we're not. And we're going to have a lot of suffering, a lot of illness, a lot of violence, a lot of death.
Well, and where do we find these kind of reliable, information sources? I think that's something, Stephan, that people really struggle with these days is how do we find, the data? How do we find the truth when there's so much out there that's conflicting and confusing?
Yes, you have put your finger or your hand or your mind, whatever, on, I think, Stephanie, the big change thing, the thing that has changed that we've not seen before. The development of unregulated media where you can put out deliberate disinformation and spread it very quickly across the country, which did not exist. You know, in earlier times, people might spread rumors. You know, you went into a bar, you go into a restaurant, you went to church, you gossiped, you spread rumors, but that's not what happens now. Today, what happens is people very deliberately using social media create disinformation, and then they pump it out very carefully, and it gets out to millions and millions of people. This is a new thing that we have not seen before. And so getting reliable information is, as you point out, very difficult sometimes. How are we going to do that? Well, I think one of the ways we do it is that we begin rating all of the media. What is the accuracy level of this media? You know, I do schwartzreport.net every day, and I go to great lengths to make sure that what I'm putting out is data-based. So I use, you know, Gallup and Pew and the Brennan Center, and you know, there are lots of places that do this careful kind of collection of data, but it is difficult. I understand that. And I also understand that we have very active efforts to create disinformation, create an alternative world, what Rachel Maddow calls Earth 2.
Mm.
And so the difficulty that we face, and I mean, you put your finger on it, is that we need to find a way to rate the quality of information, and we need to make that available. So you can say to somebody who quotes something at you, you can say, well, yes, you must have gotten that off of InfoWorld, and they have a 12% accuracy rating. And that is a challenge. And I think what's going to happen is that out of this great sort of mass of information, a group needs to grow up. I mean, groups have grown up. You know, there are the things that rate accuracy, but we need to begin to rate accuracy. And I also think that while it is appropriate, I am a strong supporter of free speech. I do think that yelling fire in a crowded theater should not be legal. And so I think another thing, when an agency holds a public license from the government to broadcast, like your radio station has a public license that they own to broadcast at their particular frequency. When you hold a public license, I think concurrent with that should be the responsibility that you put out only accurate information to the degree that that is possible for you. And so we need a kind of rating agency, not to the politics. I don't care about partisan politics. You know, I'm not interested in partisanship. What I want to know is, if you do this, does it produce well-being? It's very simple.
Yeah.
And so the question is, does this information support well-being? And if the answer is no, it does not, then that needs to be put out, and people need to know that.
Absolutely. And that, you know, that I think then therein lies the charge for people, you know, to speak up and to be that voice, to how, you know, and I guess that's a question as well, is how do we start forming those kind of accountability groups? I don't know where that stems from.
Well, I'm not sure quite where it's going to stem from either, but it is beginning, you're beginning to see bits and pieces of it coming up. And I think the question is, to any individual who is listening to our conversation, who is in a position to do that, that's what they take up. I mean, you know, with Schwartz Report, I make a commitment that I publish only things which I can validate. And, maybe once or twice every couple of years, I have to publish a correction. But I put hours in every day, and I give it away to make sure that the information that I'm putting into Schwartz Report is accurate. Because I think you have a responsibility when you have a platform, a radio show or a television show or a web publication, whatever. When you do that and you have that platform and you also have a responsibility that what you're going to put forward is accurate, and that takes work, but nonetheless, it can be done, is done. It used to be when you published in magazines, by the way, like Smithsonian, they had fact checkers. Mm-hmm. So you'd submit your article to the editor and they'd send them out to the fact checkers. And the first thing, before they even accepted it, they'd come back to you and say, we've fact checked the following things and we don't think that you're correct about whatever. And why do you think you are correct? And you had to present your data. So I used to submit, when I was writing magazine pieces like that, I would footnote them all or endnote them all so that the fact checkers could find everything. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but that kind of fact checking so that you only put forward accurate information, I think is a responsibility of having the privilege of having a platform.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to take one last break and we'll be back just for a small segment and just hope that you will join us. Boy, this is just such imperative information. And truly, again, these are the keys that can help us to really transform where we're at, that we actually, the point of power, I always say, is in the present moment. And so in the present moment, we can start making these choices that truly are going to make a difference. So more in a moment. Come on back with myself and Stephan A Schwartz. So we're back. Thank you for joining us. We have just been having just truly an enlightening and inspiring conversation with scientific researcher Stephan A Schwartz. And Stephan, one of the things I think that I would love to ask you about in this last segment, even though we don't have a lot of time, I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit about how we move towards cohesiveness. How do we move towards this? Larry Dossey would call it the one mind, where we're more aware that that's truly how we're all connected, because we're in this society right now, this cancel culture and this culture where, you were saying earlier, it's us against them and it's the other. What are some of the ways that we move more towards this? We're all in this together.
Well, there are a lot of things that depends, a lot of answers to that question. You could, for instance, start a meditation group. We know, for instance, that where people meditate together frequently on a regular basis, that it creates a kind of coherence that produces change. You can do it because when you are doing something or making a decision to do something, you explicitly say why you're doing it. I'm trying to promote well-being. Mm. First of all, you just talk about well-being. The problem we have in the country, in my opinion, is that the only social priority that we have at the moment in the United States is profit. It doesn't make money. And I'm nothing against making money, but I think that creating well-being ought to be the first step, and making money can be the second step. So the question is, does this thing, that whatever it is that we're going to do, produce well-being? Is that its first priority? And if you look at countries, for instance, you look at New Zealand right now. New Zealand, country run by a woman, they have explicitly made fostering of well-being the first priority for all government policies. And you can see already the change in the social outcome data. I mean, by social outcome data, I mean things like, what is the infant mortality rate? What's the maternal mortality rate? What's the obesity rate? What's the heart disease rate? What's the poverty rate? What's the literacy rate? The incarceration rate? Those are all social outcome data. That's all social outcome data that can be measured. If you look at the Scandinavian countries right now, what you see is people are happier. The healthcare system works better. People are more affluent. They're better educated. We have to start in the United States by telling ourselves the truth about ourselves. And that's very difficult because we like to tell ourselves we're best in the world, we're the leaders, we're the whatever. But in fact, when you look at the data, again, this is not speculation, has nothing to do with my political views or any of that. I don't care about that. You just look at the data. What you can see is we rank 37th in the world in terms of healthcare. We lead the developed world in maternal mortality. We have our educational system does very poorly. We got to start by telling ourselves the truth. And I am happy to hear that the new administration at least is trying to do that in most instances. So we tell each other the truth, for starters. And then we make decisions that produce well-being as measured by objectively verifiable data. You know, if you change the healthcare regulations, for instance, then you would expect to see that maternal mortality would go down, infant mortality would go down, obesity would go down, education, if you change your educational system, then education will go up. I mean, most Americans, this is appalling, most Americans cannot name the 9 Supreme Court justices or even how many Supreme Court justices there are. So we start by educating ourselves about the truth about ourselves, and then we look at those truths and we make decisions which alter those truths by supporting well-being. And if we do that, and things like this radio program you're doing, you do this regularly on your show, this kind of thing, you know, if you touch 10 people today, and those 10 people listen to us and make this commitment, and they go tell 10 of their friends, and 10 of their friends tell 10 of their friends, you have no idea the effect that this can have. So you do it, but you don't have cherished expectations. You just do it because it's the right thing to do.
Well, and you know, Stephan, as a psychotherapist, this is just really resonating with me. It's almost like, you know, like the world needs to undergo like major therapy. And the first part of that is, to me, it's always the awareness, number one, that something is truly wrong and admitting that.
Yes.
And then being really willing to look at what is that, so that we can do the work necessary to make the change. That's how transformation happens. It's not by putting our head in the sand, pretending it doesn't exist. And it's also not by blowing it up and making it, you know, catastrophizing.
Yes.
It's by, like you said, really having this honest, straightforward look at this is where we're failing. This is where programs aren't working. This is where philosophies aren't working or paradigms. And then I love that. Then we make the choice for what is going to bring the highest well-being for each one of us and as a collective.
Yes. It's sort of like treating the country as one person.
Yes.
If a person comes in to see you as a therapist, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to get them to really understand what the problem is. If they don't understand what the problem is, they can't fix it.
Exactly.
So you have to help them. That may take many sessions to finally get them to really not only realize, but accept what the difficulty is. Then you can begin the process of healing. And we have to do the same thing as a country. We have to admit our racism. We have to admit that there is a percentage of population that want women to be subordinate. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Measurable truth. And so you start with those things. And then once you have identified the real problem, then you can begin to talk about how to fix it, not as some kind of theoretical thing, but you always know I cannot find a contradiction. I've been looking for 25 years now. We'll call it Schwartz's law of well-being. Now, when you do things which foster well-being, it is always more productive, more efficient, easier to do, quicker to accomplish, nicer to live under, and here's the big one, much, much cheaper. That's the thing that they don't tell you, is that things that foster well-being are not more expensive, they're cheaper. Always.
Wow. Well, I love the Schwartz laws. I think that if we incorporated those, we'd be living in such a different planet. And, I appreciate you so much. And I appreciate you sharing this just essential message and messages with us and with the listening audience. I mean, to me, this is the hope for change. I think this is what you were talking about, our founding fathers and the people that have just been working throughout our history, and you yourself as an example of how one person can make change and that it can catch on, and eventually that 10% becomes that tipping point.
Yep.
And we can see this change in our world.
Yep.
So Stephan, any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with? Any essential message or anything uncovered?
No, we're doing this on the 5th of July. We've just celebrated our national creation. And I think there could not be a better time to begin to make choices, each individually, that support well-being. And next year, let's see where we are.
Perfect. I hope that we can get together again. And a year from now, we're having a very different conversation about how incredibly the world has come together and made change for all of our well-being.
May it be so.
Thank you, Stephan Schwartz, for this time. Always enjoy spending time with you. It's such a pleasure and honor to be with you.
Thanks for tuning in to The Spark with Stephanie James. Remember that you already have what you need to live a life that is fully lit and fully alive. You're already holding the flame. Now it's time to ignite your best life. Learn more at stephaniejames.world. That's stephaniejames.world. And tune in next week at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, only on transformationtalkradio.com. Shine on!